Second book of Kings, chapters 3 and 4 today, and we now meet a chap called Joram, who is another son of Ahab, who replaces King Ahaziah, who was another son of Ahab, when he dies because he fell down his big hole in the last video. It's interesting, it notes here that we've stopped the escalation of how terrible the kings are. This guy is not as bad as the previous ones, but he's still not great, so I quite like how it makes that gentle distinction. It also notes here that Jehoshaphat is still on the throne of Judah. So Joram is king of the 11 tribes of Israel, and Jehoshaphat is the king of the other one, the Judah tribe. I quite like the little bits where it puts in some sort of detail to let you know where we are roughly in terms of history and timeline, especially when we're doing two different sides of the story. Really useful. Anyway, we then open with the king of Moab. Previously, apparently, used to bring gifts to the kings of Israel, gifts as tribute, basically to stay friends. But he decides that randomly he doesn't want to do that anymore, and he's not going to do this. Joram and Jehoshaphat, anyway, get together with the king of Edom and decide they're going to go and give Moab a kicking. Oh, it's very confusing. This every week, so many new names to deal with. Anyway, so the armies of Jehoshaphat, Joram, and the king of Edom, who doesn't have a name apparently, they set off through the desert of Edom, and 7 days later it turns out they're still not where they're supposed to be, and they've run out of water. So yeah, not the greatest planning exercise there. As tends to be the thing at this time, they call for a prophet to go and consult God and see what that's all about. And handily, it turns out Elisha is there. The problem is Elisha's a little bit cranky about this because he doesn't like the king of Edom, and he doesn't like Joram, but he seems to think Jehoshaphat is kind of cool, so he's going to help them just because of Jehoshaphat. And to do his work, he calls for a harpist. I really like that. I might start doing that at work. If someone comes over and says, Rob, what do you think of this? So, bring me a harpist and play tinkly tunes for me, and then I will tell you. It's a good plan. It's announced anyway that message from God comes that there is going to be no rain, but there are pools of water going to spontaneously appear. And by the way, you are going to beat the Moabites. So it seems like a pretty good day. Doesn't mention if anyone stays up overnight to see what happens, but pools of water appear the next morning, and yeah, great. All looking good. They go on anyway to kick the Moabites' butts, as it was said they would do. And just to make the point, to make it clear that the Moabites were such terrible people, it says that the Moabite king sacrifices his own son on the wall of the city. Oh, great, nice. That is then it for that part of the story. It just abruptly ends there and we move on to something else. And that something else is a widow who is in trouble with the tax man, comes to Elisha and asks him for help. Apparently all she has is a small jug of olive oil, that old chestnut again. And Elisha says to her what she should do is go around all her neighbours, gather up as many empty jars as she can, and then fill them up from the very small jug of olive oil. And then, as we've seen previously with the flour that never seems to run out and the rest of it, she manages to fill up all these jars, and then she takes away and sells them to the tax man, and all is well. We then move straight on to another miracle where Elisha is living with some Shunammite lady, her husband, who's very old, and they have no son, it says. Elisha tells the woman she is going to have a son, and she's quite upset by this because it feels like he's taunting her. But lo and behold, she becomes pregnant. Doesn't sound like Elisha has anything to do with this physically, it's just a prediction, and seems all to involve the husband. We then skip forward quite a bit of time to the boy is at least old enough to speak. It doesn't say how old he is. And he's clutching his head, saying he's got a headache, and dies. So Elisha has moved on by this point, but the mother then goes to find him. And it notes interestingly that Elisha is surprised that God hasn't told him that the boy has died and the mother is coming to see him, but never mind. And Elisha says, okay, take my staff, run back to the boy, lay it on his face. Bit weird. But the mother doesn't want to do that. She says, I will not leave here without you. You must come with me. So Elisha goes with her. And instead of him laying his staff on her face, as you think he might, he lays on the boy's face. So he's literally just lying on top of him, face to face, eyes to eyes, mouth to mouth, I think it says. You know, he's there, and this poor kid he's dead at least. And he's got Elisha lying on him. Couldn't do that these days, could you? Couldn't write a story with that in. That would not go down well at all. Anyway, it says the boy's body begins to warm up. Elisha hops off. The boy sneezes 7 times and then wakes up. So, yeah, I mean, we had the question before of whether that was a resurrection or resuscitation. This one clearly, definitely supposed to be a resurrection. We then have 2 more food-related miracles that are sort of relatively minor, to the extent that a miracle could be minor. And it seems like some sort of accident in making stew, and someone puts some plant in it that's not supposed to be. They start eating it, realise, this is terrible, this is going to kill us. And Elisha fixes it by putting some flour in. Don't know. And then some chap brings 20 loaves of bread to Elisha and asks him, what should I do with this? And Elisha says, give it to the people, which is mentioned elsewhere, seems to reference a group of 100 people. And the chap with the bread goes, that's ridiculous, how is this going to feed that many people? But it does, and then there's lots left over. So in the short version, that's just an awful lot of miracles, and it seems that Elisha is even more magic than Moses even, or anybody else who's gone before him. It's just prolific, one miracle after another. In terms of the interesting points to take from that, we definitely have a resurrection this time. There is no question it's resuscitation anymore, because this kid was dead for some time. And, well, it's really clever, isn't it? I don't quite know what to do with it still. I didn't realise the Bible has so many resurrections in it. I mean, obviously, there's the Jesus one later on, and then, spoiler alert. And then there's Lazarus, another spoiler alert. I hadn't realised there had been Old Testament resurrections, so that's kind of interesting. The second one is the pools of water that appear. That's pretty close to an abracadabra miracle, because I don't recall anyone having to do anything to get it. As I've talked about several times before, whenever there's some sort of miraculous thing, someone has to do something, even if it's just a token gesture. Like there was the one, Moses has to get a piece of wood and throw it into a pool of water that tastes bitter, and doing this seems to sort that out. There is always something. Yet this one just seems to be everyone go to bed, wake up in the morning, there's water. So it's as close to an abracadabra moment as you seem to get in the Bible. It did make me wonder, actually, is in the absence of modern stories and knowing how you have ideas in your head about how to do magic with this abracadabra, and poof, there it is. 3,000 years ago, what would have been an interesting idea for how you bring about miracles? I mean, is it just you go poof, and you've suddenly got a gallon of olive oil, or or a ton of flour, or whatever. It's all done in sort of subtle, mysterious ways. You don't see the mechanics, and it's I don't know what to do with it. It's obviously there's no evidence for any of this stuff, so we can't exactly draw any conclusions. But it's interesting and it's clever. But it's interesting that it chooses to be subtle. Don't know. Anyway, we shall move on and see if Elisha gets up to any more of these.